Hello. I don't quite know who I'm saying hello to because I don't think anyone is going to be listening to this, but I'm just putting it out into the ether. I've been wanting to do something having to do with Bon Jovi randomly for a long while, and I thought I was maybe going to script it. It's just been taking too long. So I'm just coming in here. I don't even quite know what I'm going to talk about, but I just want to talk about Bon Jovi because I'm a relatively new fan. It's now been over a year, more or less. I became a fan last year after watching the Hulu documentary, Thank You, Good Night. And so now I've just been, trying to dig into the Bon Jovi online fandom and just watch as much as I can as far as performances and interviews and keep up with current events. And this is just going to be a hodgepodge. I guess I'm just giving my overall thoughts as a relatively new fan to Bon Jovi on this and that and the other. I just want to ramble because I really don't know anyone in I don't have friends or what have you, acquaintances, etc., who are interested in Bon Jovi like I am and want to hear me just rattle on. So I am just putting this out here so I can purge my, obsession. Something like that. So I don't know where to start. Maybe the fact that, I was around when Bon Jovi was around in the 80s. So even though I'm a new fan, it's not because I wasn't alive to be a fan before now. I just honestly, I knew of Bon Jovi, I knew of Living on a Prayer, etc. But to be honest, what I heard of their music and what I saw of them, I'm just going to be 100% honest, it didn't really quote unquote resonate with me. I guess I felt that they made music that was obviously very popular, that was very commercially minded, which I don't have a problem with. But it seemed to me that it was very purposely sort of inoffensive, the kind of music that could appeal to a broad audience, but in that sense didn't have a very strong, distinctive style. And I just always felt like it's fine, but it doesn't draw me in personally. It's not my kind of music, whatever that means. And um, the perfect example for me, even though this would be in the early 2000s, was the song "It's My Life." Now I understand that they had a whole career before that with very different sounding music, but "It's My Life" is just an example of the type of music I'm talking about. I remember it was so popular; it was played on like VH1, MTV all the time. I would always see that video, and I would think, this just isn't for me. Like the whole vibe and it's not that it wasn't catchy, it just was like, it's there. I understand why people like it. It's just not grabbing me. And that's just kind of how I felt about Bon Jovi. So last year, because I do like documentaries, and when I watch a documentary, it doesn't necessarily have to be about something I'm already familiar with or interested in, so to speak. Um, I just find myself curious. So I saw the trailer for the Hulu documentary Thank You Good Night, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to watch this. It just seemed interesting to me. So I ended up watching it a while after it came out, a few months probably after it came out, and I liked it. And I can't remember now because it's been a year my exact impressions, but must have been pretty good because after that I did a deep dive into the Bon Jovi. And so I must have gone on YouTube and looked at interviews and especially performances, live performances. And now know that Bon Jovi is known for this, but I really didn't know it before. They're a great live band. So one of the first things I came across, luckily, now I know, was An Evening with Bon Jovi, the sort of 1992 MTV special. And I was really impressed. The band was so tight, they were so good and on it. And then I was really impressed with John's live vocals. Um, I really didn't know because you can never tell when it comes to singers. You know, what they're given in the studio is not always what they're giving live. And so I really didn't know much about John as a live performer. And I'm always impressed, to be honest, when a singer, yes, even though that's their profession, when a singer can actually sing and they can deliver live, I think it's pretty rare and it stands out. So I was really impressed. And I didn't know it at the time, but now I know that 92 was a great year. Not just 92, but that was a great period for John vocally. He was particularly strong. So that was a great introduction, so to speak, for me. And to be honest, I was kind of hooked right away. It was sort of strange to go from not really messing with Bon Jovi like that to all of a sudden going, to be honest, I love John Bon Jovi's voice live, and it's kind of like my favorite male vocal vibe. I usually don't even have a favorite vocalist, male or female, but there was just something about what he was giving live. It really, really worked for me. So from then on, of course, I continue going down the rabbit hole, and all of a sudden, I'm obsessed with Bon Jovi. And that's where I am now. So whenever I'm obsessed with something, the next step is I gotta go on social media and see what the kids are saying. It's Reddit time, it's Twitter time. I'm not gonna call it X. You know, it's time. And it was interesting to see what the overall feel was in the Bon Jovi fandom. So I will say y'all is kind of spicy, kind of tart, which I didn't really see as a bad thing. You got a little spice to you. So, you know, quite opinionated. There's snark, there's sarcasm, there's a certain dry way. And I don't know where that comes from, but that's the vibe I'm getting from a lot of Bon Jovi fans. Maybe it's fitting because I think a lot of the members of Bon Jovi have that kind of sense of humor about them. What is it, a New Jersey thing or something? I don't know. But I went, okay, they're a little, you know, they got a little spunk to them. Um, you know, every fandom has to have that one thing that is the point of conflict, the sensitive subject, the thing that gets people riled up. And I found out very quickly that that one thing is Richie. I guess number two, you can say is Shanks, but Richie is a big thing in this fandom, which is really interesting to me. There are times when I really become aware of how much of a quote unquote newbie I am to things because I can feel it. I don't see things the same way that a lot of people do. And maybe it's because I don't have that deep emotional attachment to the band, frankly, that a lot of fans do. You have some people who say they were a fan before Bon Jovi was a thing, when it was just John Bon Jovi with Runaway, right, as this single. There are people who have been there since the 80s. And so it's been, decades. And I try to remind myself of that because I'm going to be honest. The Richie thing is really interesting to me. Um, he left the band. I understand how that would be extremely dramatic for someone who had been in the band for 30 years. He leaves the band, and it's so, I'm going to say, interesting to me, fascinating that so many years later, about 12 years on, people are still talking about it really as if Richie left yesterday. They're still going, where's Richie? We want Richie back. They're still going on Bon Jovi's official social media and going, where's Richie? And I'm going to be completely honest, as a newbie slash outsider, I don't really get that. I feel like at some point, even if internally you miss Richie and you wish he were back, I don't get that transition from taking your personal feelings and then kind of acting as if they are valid enough to go on, like, official social media and just reply. It doesn't matter what the post you're replying to is about. You just go, Richie, where's Richie? Richie isn't here. It's obvious at this point. Richie left the band. There were reasons. Those reasons really haven't changed. There's no reason to think that he's going to be back in the band. Him and John are not in a good way. They don't seem to be big fans of one another. So to me, it is peculiar, I'm going to be honest, that there is this thing with Richie when it's so obvious that that's done. It's just not the reality, and it hasn't been for so long. Um, so that's a very interesting thing to me. Another thing you see is that there's definitely a Team John, Team Richie rigmarole going on that is also very interesting. And there is, you know, a whole really intense and loyal Richie contingent that, yeah, I think that's its own story and its own vibe. And again, I'll just say fascinating, fascinating. But while we're on the topic of Richie, there is that question of why Richie left, which is a really interesting thing. We have what we know, what's been publicly divulged, and then we have our guesses. And this is just such a random hodgepodge, but I'll just throw in my 20 cents and say that what I perceive to have happened from the little that we know is, I think that if I had to really, really sum it up, I think that right or wrong, whether it was messed up or justified or not, I think that at some point John really wasn't feeling the partnership with Richie anymore. And I think this happened before 2013 when Richie left. I think it's something that had been stewing for years. And I think that that was reflected in obviously the working relationship and probably the personal relationship between John and Richie, where over time it appears that Richie's role in the band was just being, I think, kind of systematically reduced. His role as co-writer, um, his role um, when it came to even in the studio. So in the documentary, it's mentioned that when they were working on the What About Now album, Richie at some point came in and they're like, we're good. We have the songs already. We even have the parts down. So for this song called The Fighter, um, they had already taken care of the riff. They had already taken care of that, and Richie wasn't even needed to play the riff. So there were all these things that were letting Richie know, you're not needed, you're not wanted. And as for why would John not want to continue that kind of partnership that he had with Richie? He's your co-writer, your lead guitarist. I mean, they had their shtick on stage, right, where they were doing the lead singer, lead guitarist thing, where they would interact with each other. In interviews, a lot of times they would do press together. That was definitely a part of the Bon Jovi thing, that classic lead singer, lead guitarist vibe. Um, so what happened after, 30 years or so? My guess is that, and again, this is just descriptive. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but, or that it's even Richie's fault, but I would have to think that number one, I see John as someone who, this is just my perception, could be wrong, not everyone will agree. I see John as the type of person who, if he could quote unquote get away with it and be as successful as he is in the band, I think he's the type who would like the solo artist vibe. I think he's the type who would like to just, in a really straightforward, unambiguous way, have his own platform, be the focal point, and be able to just do what he wants to do. And I really think that's more or less the situation with him in the band. It's always been clear that he is the lead, he is the leader, in every sense of the word. But find it interesting that he's even in a band, because he just seems like the type of person who would enjoy the things that come with being a solo artist. So I think there must have been some practical reasons. It could be that at the time in the early 80s, bands were the thing. That was what was popular, and being packaged as a band maybe is something that was seen as more viable or commercially um, you know, attractive than presenting yourself as a solo artist. So, I- if my theory is true, then I imagine there was always this tension, and Richie has spoken to it in certain interviews. This idea that he had to, um, from time and again, he had to, or from time to time, remind John, oh, this is a band. Remember, there are other people here. And this was like back in the 80s. He mentioned, for example, that around the time of Slippery When Wet, he gave some sort of ultimatum to John. Like, remember, we're supposed to be working together. So I think there was always this tension where John, kind of is more into the solo vibe, but technically you have other band members. My point with that is, I think John was willing to, do that and collaborate with Richie, and Richie's credited as co-writer, and Richie's getting a certain amount of attention, and there's that partnership. I think that that's something that John was open to, as long as it was bearing fruit, as long as it was fruitful in a really tangible way, because I think John is really he's really about the bottom line, and he's very no nonsense, and he's very like so about tangible results. So with Slippery When Wet, his collaboration with Richie and Desmond Child is yielding things like Living on a Prayer. You know, you give love a bad name. So you can see very easily the benefit of this partnership. But what I think is that as time went along, and again, it's not necessarily Richie's fault, but as far as producing hits, which John is very concerned with, I think, despite what he says sometimes, um, as time goes on, and this happens with any band who's been around for a long while, as time goes on, um, you know, the band wasn't really producing huge hits anymore. So my feeling is, once this became apparent, I think someone like John is looking at the situation going, okay, so I'm sharing co-writing credits. That probably involves some money, of course. I'm sharing the limelight, I'm sharing time, etc., etc. Now, what am I getting from this partnership? And what he's getting over time, I think, from his point of view, might have been diminishing. He starts to focus more on maybe the disadvantages, and then whatever could be going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, the ongoing tension that I think has been there since the beginning, that you have between sometimes um members of the band, that power struggle, that competition that Doc McGee mentioned in the documentary. I know people don't like when this subject is brought up, but we know, it's publicly known, that Richie has struggled with addiction through the years in various ways. What kind of tension might that have added to things? So, with thinking in the John way, thinking in the John way, you have this situation where you're collaborating with someone, and maybe it's just you don't see it as being as beneficial. The hits aren't there, tension is there. Apparently, there were creative differences. He and Richie were clashing, so you're clashing. Richie's pushing back because, as John's right hand man, he's in a position where he probably can push back a little more than, the other band members. So this person has this sort of um, leverage, but maybe from John's point of view, it's no longer really viable. Like, what am I getting from this? So I really think that that transition of the band, where they're no longer producing hits the way they used to, I think that could have had a profound effect on John's perception of his partnership with Richie. But my point is, I do think something happened, and John just wasn't feeling it anymore. And I'm not saying that it's right or that it's Richie's fault, but I do think that's probably the case. Now, I think that John is a very um, shrewd person. And I think that even though at some point he really wasn't feeling the whole Richie thing, I think he's also aware of optics and he's mindful of that sort of thing. And so I don't think he felt comfortable, for example, just letting Richie go, doing something extreme like that, because he would come across as the bad guy. And it just looks a certain way if John Bon Jovi fires Richie, who's been in the band now for 30 years. So I do think what he did, and I do suspect that it was systematic and purposeful. I do think that instead of just, cutting the cord abruptly, he just kind of slowly reduced Richie's relevance in the band. Things like bringing Bobby Bandiera in. I think that's a huge moment and not really in a positive way. I know that if I were Richie, I wouldn't be pleased with this idea that for so long I was more than enough as a lead guitarist, and now we need to bring in another guitar. Why? What does that say about my place? So I just think there were these things where Richie's role was being systematically lessened, and I just think it got so extreme and so obvious that Richie just couldn't handle it anymore. And what I'm trying to get at is I think that John probably anticipated this, probably knew that by you know, reducing Richie's role, that eventually Richie might reach a breaking point where he no longer wants to be there. And frankly, if Richie leaves, that's a different feel than if John fires him. So it reminds me of, and for whatever reason, it seems to be men who are more prone to do this, but a married man who, for whatever reason, no longer wants to be in the relationship, and instead of just asking for a divorce, he starts doing things in almost a passive aggressive way. He starts being cold and difficult. He might start having affairs, whatever he's doing, to push the wife away. And then once she gets tired of it and she says, "I think we need to get a divorce," he goes, "Well, if that's what you think." And so, he didn't end the relationship. It just happened that way. And I feel like it's a similar vibe with John Bon Jovi. I do, because um yes, I do think John, he said it himself, he has that classic lead singer syndrome where he's very much about himself. But I also think he's very perceptive and intelligent, and it's just common sense. There's no way he couldn't know that the things he was doing. I mean, once you get to that period of time where Richie's basically not even needed at times in the studio and he's been effectively replaced, there's no way that you can't know that that's going to be painful and hurtful and frustrating to Richie. To my mind, you don't do that without at least not caring. Like, maybe you just don't care one way or the other. If he wants to stick around, he can. But basically, I feel like Richie was unofficially demoted, you know, to almost kind of hired hand status. And there's no way that Richie, who enjoyed this status of, right hand man, is going to be okay with just being, put in the background. So, anyway, just random thing there. So I do think that Richie just couldn't take it anymore, and he left. And of course, he left in spectacular fashion. This is already too long, but I'll just say briefly about that. I will just say that I don't think it's a coincidence that Richie left the way he did, with no real, in a very abrupt way that put John and the band and the crew, etc., in a bind. I do think that that was something that he did purposely, because he could have given some notice. He could have uh, been honest with himself and not committed to the tour to begin with. He could have seen the tour out and then left the band, or if he just couldn't make it through the tour, he could have given notice, even if it's 2 weeks or what have you. Like, "Sorry guys, I can't do this. You got me for 2 weeks. Bring someone on. I'll help you with onboarding. We can talk about how we'll present this to the public, but I can't do this." No, he did it in the most abrupt, sloppiest way possible, and I think that was purposeful. I do think that he wanted to hurt John, so to speak. If you feel like you're not important to the band anymore, you're not important to John, what's the one way that you can get his attention and kind of make your mark? Well, you hit him where it hurts. You hit him where it hurts. The career, the tour, the band. So I do think that that was it was very much a Richie John thing as far as the way that Richie handled things. The last thing I'll say about that, because this is so long, is I think this shows to me a difference between Richie and John and their personalities or mentalities, because I think Richie was just thinking, in the moment, angry, frustrated, and there might have been things going on that we're not aware of, sort of that kind of reactionary thing. I'll show John. Um, but I think if he had a more John frame of mind, he might have refrained from doing that, because in the aftermath, if you care about optics, which maybe Richie doesn't in the same way, it puts you at a disadvantage because you've left in a way that is just not very professional. It gives John that sort of opportunity to go, hey, he left. He kind of left us in a lurch and we had to do what we had to do. If Richie had left in a more official, a professional way, it wouldn't have given John that kind of leeway to point or allude to, the way that Richie left. And he would probably have to, um, refrain from uh, saying certain things, and it would just put the onus on John to be, professional and tactful and such. But I don't think Richie was thinking about all of that. Um, and finally, I guess the one name that I haven't mentioned is Shanks. That's another thing. There's a lot of Shanks hate. I don't know him. I don't know a lot about him, but I also find that interesting because we know that this band is centered around John Bon Jovi, and to my mind, not much happens in the band that doesn't go through him. I don't think anything goes without his say. So this idea that Shanks is this I don't know, this puppet master pulling the strings, or that he's somehow the main person who's responsible for what's happening in the band, what's happened with Richie, is odd to me. I think that, yeah, I'm sure Shank's presence exacerbated things, and it's possible that Richie isn't a big fan of Shanks, for example. But to me, Shanks was just a symptom. He was almost maybe a sort of pawn, a sort of tool in the John Ritchie saga of it all. Because again, I do think that John is very methodical, we'll say. And I just don't see how Shanks could do anything that John doesn't want him to do. So the truth is, if Shanks somehow, his presence created a wedge, or even if he purposely did things to create a wedge, he did that under John Bon Jovi's watch. There's no way that John Bon Jovi was not aware of that. So he knowingly let that happen, if it's true. And I think it served a purpose for him, because I do think he already wasn't really feeling the partnership with Richie. And if Shank's going to come along and that's going to stir things up and maybe hasten Richie's departure, so be it. And Shanks provides John, from what I can tell, probably with a certain consistency. He probably is someone who's not looking to make things more difficult or to argue or to give pushback. John can have the setup that he's probably always wanted, which is where he is unequivocally the boss, and everyone is there to facilitate what he wants, and he doesn't really get, much pushback, and Shanks probably serves that purpose. So the focus on Shanks to me is bizarre. I guess it takes a little heat off of John, which I also think works in his favor. I haven't seen him doing much to try to kind of shield Shanks from the heat, even in the documentary. The way they present Shanks, I didn't really care. It didn't make me think anything overly negative about him personally, but I know that people who already didn't like him surely didn't enjoy the way that Shanks was presented, where he's laughing and he seems like maybe he's being kind of snarky or whatever about things. And John claims that he didn't have, final approval, which maybe it's a technicality, but there's no way he's letting a documentary that he's participating in go out without making sure that it presents him in the way he wants to be presented. We know this. So my point is, for Shanks to be shown in the way that he was, which could be perceived in a negative way, I have to think that John was okay with it. And I do think John is sneaky like that and is someone who would be okay with Shanks taking that heat, because it takes some of the heat off of him as far as what was behind the issue with Richie. It's like Shanks is an easy scapegoat. And yeah, I think we give Shanks way too much credit and way too much attention. This really almost has nothing to do with Shanks. It is about John and Richie. I believe that. That whole thing is really about their relationship professionally, maybe personally. Who knows? But anyway, the last thing that I want to say, well, one more thing on that. I think it is interesting, the John Ritchie thing. I liked their vibe back in the day. I liked their chemistry, but at the same time, I think it's hard to know really what the nature of the relationship was. I personally can't tell. Did these two people like each other? Like behind the scenes? Like, would they ever get on if it weren't for the band? Were they more just professional partners? Was there any, thing uh, on a personal level? Did they have what we would call a genuine friendship? What did they really feel about each other? I'm sure it depended on the year, on the moment, on the day. I'm sure they had a really complex relationship, but I don't think it's easy to read. And I think, to me, there's a lot of mystery. Of course, there's what they present, but I'm just like, I can't tell with them what their real vibe was and how close they were, or what they thought of each other, or definitely there was tension at times, but were there good times? Were they really considered each other true friends, or was it always just kind of polite and professional? I have no idea, but I do find that really interesting. I don't think we'll ever know. Last thing that I want to mention is that, as of this very random rambling thing, it's just been announced that Bon Jovi indeed is going on tour, and that's interesting. um Different thoughts out there. Some people are really excited, some people are like, what's going on? Then you have, of course, the whole, for me, completely random Richie thing. Why you would ever think that Richie was going to have anything to do with the band, period, or the band going on tour? I still don't get that, but I guess I need to factor in the emotional component, the nostalgic component. It just doesn't make any sense to me, and frankly, Richie, I don't really think is tour ready. We'll put that very nicely and tactfully. Um, yeah, it's interesting that John's going on tour. It's not surprising. It's obvious that that's what he's been gearing up for. I'll just round this up with my thoughts, I guess, on the whole John vocal issue thing. I'm definitely, I'm a huge fan, and yeah, I am Team John, whatever that means. John Bon Jovi is the person in the band that I'm drawn to and that I'm most interested in and that I'm following. But for me, anyway, when I'm a fan of something, it doesn't necessarily mean that I can't have some positive opinions and negative opinions. And I just think when you really, really like someone, you just like to dig in, and you feel strongly about things, positively or otherwise. So when it comes to John's voice, to me, it's plain to see that he is struggling. We'll put that nicely. That, to my mind, by my definition, I wouldn't really say that the surgery that he has was successful. He says that he's healed. That doesn't coincide with my perception of what it means to be healed as a singer. Would I expect him to be singing like it's 1995 or 89 or 2005? No, but I think it's obvious that his vocals are highly compromised. And, to me, by all rights, if he decided to retire, I think that that would be appropriate, kind of Aerosmith style, very graceful and honest to just say I'm not able to perform at the level that I would like to, or the level that most people would expect if they're going to pay to see me. And so, you know, gonna move on. But to me, it's clear that this is John's life. Since he was a teenager, he has been working for this, and he's just not willing to let it go. He doesn't present it that way himself, but that's what it is. It shows me that it's his everything, and he's not going to let go of the thing that has driven him and has motivated him and has given him so much. And it is what it is. So he's going on tour, and a part of me wishes that again he had the quote unquote grace to retire, but it's got to be tough, for you to first of all lose the thing that was so key to your success. I think he had a phenomenal voice, for quite a long time. I think that he really had something special as a singer, just an amazing vocalist, and particularly, as I said, his live vocals. I just think it's amazing. So it must be so difficult when you can sing the way that he sang. There's no way you don't know what you're doing. That's not accidental. So to go from being able to deliver on that level to where he is now, it must be so difficult psychologically, mentally. And I do think there's a certain amount of denial where I don't think he's willing or ready to accept the situation. And it is interesting because one thing that stuck out to me about the documentary was this thing with Fat Elvis, which really struck me as like, because he's a huge Elvis fan, and I think that was mentioned in the documentary, and I thought that's an interesting way for a fan to talk about someone who he seems to idolize. It was it was a really particular thing. But I also felt, because I'd seen him before, reference that sort of thing, that I'm not going to be one of these singers who overstays my welcome. When it's time to, I don't want to be a nostalgia act. I don't want to overstay my welcome. And at the time when he said it, I think he was in his 50s. I happened to see an interview with him when he decided to go gray. And at the time I thought, well, that's kind of, you can't know that. It's too early to say. You don't know yet what it's really like to be in that position where you have to make a choice and give up your life's work and your life's blood. Well, now he finds himself in that situation, and guess what? It's not that easy to give it up, is it? And he is clinging on, I think, for dear life to something that he just isn't willing to let go of. So it's very human. I think it's very John Bon Jovi. But I also think that I've gone on long enough. All I can say is, I understand why he's choosing to do it. I understand why people are choosing to go and see the band. And, you know, it is what it is in a selfish way. It means more content for me. I know people are complaining, which I must say I find really interesting, complaining about them releasing the album forever, complaining about them doing the re-release of the legendary edition. It's so interesting to me. This might be one of the few fandoms that I've been involved in where people do not want content, where people get mad when new content is put out. I'm from the way that I am is I'm so used to it. I feel like if you follow any sort of entertainer or writer or whatever it may be for years, especially decades, eventually there are going to be things that you're not going to like at all. I have certain artists where I haven't liked their last, 5, 6, 7 albums. But to me, you either just accept it and go, hey, I love what they put out through the years. I don't really love what they're putting out now, but I still rock with them in a certain way based on their past content. Or if it's no longer for you, quite frankly, you move on. If it's getting to the point where you have nothing or very few positive things to say, this is the piece also that I don't really understand. I guess it's just human nature, the lingering around something that has just become totally unsatisfying for you. I don't understand. And I don't understand either the anger. It's okay, they're making music that you don't like. I'm like, if you followed anyone for any amount of time, that's just par for the course. I usually don't take it personally. It's just I don't like it. So I don't rock with it. But there's kind of an anger or a sense of betrayal that, again, I guess, coming in as a newbie or someone who's used to rocking with certain artists long term, I do find it another uh, peculiar thing. But for me, as a fan, how I see it is new content equals new interviews equals new appearances. This is what I want. Give me the juice. I want. Okay, this is like 40 minutes long. The rambling is done for now. Last, I will just be really, really random. And the last thing I want to say about specifically John Bon Jovi, this is something that I knew before I became a fan back in the day. He was a beautiful man, a beautiful specimen in his day. What a beautiful, beautiful, this is so shallow, very, very attractive person. And I think that he cultivated that. I think he cultivated so many things. He seems like the type of person, this was mentioned, for example, in the documentary, like he would just will things to be. He decided that he wanted to be a rock star. So what do you need? It helps to have a good look, you know. It helps to have a certain kind of music. It helps to, have a strong voice. And I feel like he just systematically said, okay, here's how I'm gonna look, here's how I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna do what I need to do to get what I want. And now, on that very random note, um think I've purged enough for today. So these are my very random thoughts on Bon Jovi. I just wanted to get something out. Um, Maybe I'll be back for another random rant, but until then, bye bye.